think we're on. No?
Are we on?
Oh, yeah, we are.
That means the session started. So I guess we'll just get started with you guys. It's hard to see how many of you guys are here, but anyway, Alex is here. That's actually a problem. You may leave, sir. So this is the, I guess, third workflow-related session of today, and we are going to build on Jakob's excellent session, which you hopefully heard before lunch. David, go and introduce yourself.
Yeah, before that, who's been to Alex's and Jakob's session?
I can't see anything.
Jakob and Alex were there, okay. Okay, that's good. Who already uses SMA in production? 1, 2, 3.
Okay, there's some.
Great. Who uses Orchestrator? Okay, cool. Then you should be familiar with what we're going to talk about. So, yeah, David O'Brien. If you can't tell by my accent, I'm not from Norway. And even though it says I'm from Melbourne, I'm not from Australia either. My name says I'm Irish. I'm not Irish. It's a bit complicated. I'm the half Scottish German living in Australia now, so bit complicated. I'm an MVP for just change my expertise from enterprise client management to system center, data center, cloud and data center management. My focus is PowerShell, config manager, everything around automation. You can see my blog, a Twitter handle. Go follow me on Twitter if you want to hear something about automation. Yeah, and I'm a principal consultant at DiligeNet. Over to Trond.
Yeah, so my name's Trond Hindenes. I'm with Crayon here in Oslo, although I don't live in Oslo. So my main focus are Office 365, Azure, and tons of PowerShell. I was a senior consultant yesterday. I think I'm an architect today. Can't see. Maybe. I'm an architect today. And so yeah, I blog occasionally and write shit on Twitter when I'm not happy about a product or whatever. So yeah, that's basically us. The agenda today, I guess the reason why we're here is to share some experiences from real-world projects. SMA is one of those new products where a lot of people are labbing and demoing, but there might not be so much actual production stuff going on with SMA. And I've been lucky enough to been involved with two, I wouldn't call them large, but at least substantial SMA projects. So I'm going to share some stuff from there. There's some bugs and some stuff around PowerShell workflow, and then David's going to do some demos around troubleshooting and performance optimization. And then lastly, I'm going to touch on just high level how to think when you're designing runbooks for SMA. So that's not technical at all. That's just some philosophy stuff, I guess.
And if you have any questions, just shout. We can't see you, but we can hear you. So just shout and ask.
That doesn't go for Alex, though. So first and foremost, I'm going to do some notes from the field. How to set up our dev environment for working with SMA. I'm going to talk about error handling, and I could honestly talk about that for a full day, but I won't. And then touch on some of the oddities around SMA modules. And lastly, I'll touch on the few most important bugs inside of PowerShell workflow. When Jakob showed you his Lego demo earlier, which didn't work, but my point was
rub it in.
It sucked. Now, so one of the nice things with SMA is you get to componentize your code. So if you have if you need to say create a user in Active Directory from multiple runbooks, you can write one runbook that does that really well, and then just call it in or call that child runbook from wherever else you need to create a user. Now, the main difference between running, like we say, headless scripts like SMA does and running it on your computer is that you don't get those error messages flashed in your face. So you need to control failure a lot better than you need to do when you're just running one-off scripts on your computer. And then there's this discussion. If you have a parent and a child, say the child 1 is the create 80 user, but then if that fails, you have to decide what should happen. Should the script just continue? Because a lot of times that's what PowerShell does by default. Or maybe you want to call a second runbook that sends an email to an admin or whatever and says, hey, I couldn't create this user. What do you want to do with it? A lot of the, what can I say, when you take a regular PowerShell script and implement it into SMA, probably half the time or more will be to implement thorough error handling. So we're going to touch a lot on that. And then you basically have two ways of doing that. You can write the error handling in the parent, and then that means that you don't have to be super strict in your child runbooks, because if they have an error, the parent will pick it up. Or you might decide to implement error handling inside the child runbook. That might make it harder for the parent to actually know that something went wrong. So my suggestion would be to do parent scripts with really good error handling, and then just make the child runbooks fail if they need to. Error is not a bad thing. I mean, error in a script is not a bad thing. It's a sign that something didn't work the way you intended it to. So it's really important to actually surface those errors instead of turning your back or just pretend they're not there. And if you look at the gallery scripts that Microsoft publishes, and I've given them shit for this on Twitter, they have basically no error handling. So don't take those scripts as best practice by any means. So demo time. I'm not used to having a co-presenter, so at this point I would just talk until everyone left. So David, you have to stop me.
I'm going to stop you.
Yeah. So the first thing is setting up our development station. Obviously, we can sit in the web thingy and write our scripts, and that's fine for just tweaking code or whatever. But the PowerShell team has already written the ISE, which is a good IDE for writing PowerShell scripts. So why not use that? And as Jakob touched on, there's this emulated activities module you can import down, and that gives you access to those commands that are normally only accessible inside a runbook. A good example is get ps. Didn't I import it? Maybe I didn't. So there's a few. Basically, the commandlets that give you access to retrieving a variable or a credential from the asset store. You don't normally have those accessible inside your ISE. But install this emulated activities module, and you are good to go. So the only thing you need to do inside that module is to set up the URL of your SMA server, because the module needs to know that when it pulls down those live objects. So that is that, and I have a list. So yeah, error handling. And I even have, I guess it's this guy. So my demo is basically just a bunch of workflows, and I'll describe some of them in detail and just run through some of them. First question, how many types of errors do we have in PowerShell? 2, any higher? No, so it's 2. So in PowerShell we have non-terminating and terminating errors. And I'm sure you've seen both. A non-terminating error by default just lets PowerShell continue to run, whereas a non-terminating error actually stops it. And that's important because you want to control, or you want to know if SMA has an error creating a user. You might not want to go to the next step, which is send an email to the user and say, hey, your account is set up and everything's fine, because it really isn't. And then in PowerShell, we have different ways of tracking these errors. So I have a runbook that just, let's see, testing error modes. So this guy, I'll just run it locally first. Testing error mode. So I can basically say error mode, terminating, and that actually throws a terminating error. And if I give it a non-terminating parameter, it will just do write error. Write error is an example of a non-terminating error. So if you just do a long script and hit write enter and then continue the script, you'll see that PowerShell will continue running. Which is not a bad thing. You just have to know it, I guess. So if I run this guy, so say at the end of this, I say write output, and you probably noticed that I didn't get that output here. So the script actually stopped, or the workflow actually stopped. However, if I do non-terminating, I got an error, but the script continued, right? So that's the big difference. So the way to make sure that, if you want to make sure that your errors are always terminating, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do error action stop, and that you can basically do that on all functions and commandlets. Or you can set an error action preference for the whole function, which is error action preference equals stop. That will elevate all the non-terminating errors up to terminating errors so that you can control it. And I'll get back to why that's important. And then when we start mixing these runbooks with parent and child runbooks, I have a parent runbook here that basically just calls that child with various parameters. So the first thing it does, it calls it with a non-terminating error and then with a terminating one. And then I show here that if you set error action to stop, the non-terminating errors will actually stop the script. I won't show this because it's logical enough, but I'll publish these scripts to GitHub or whatever so you can see it. Questions? Yeah.
Can you downgrade the terminating errors to non-terminating so you can, for instance, write an error log before you terminate?
No, you would use the try-catch block for that. And I think I have an example of that as well. Yeah. So try-catch block basically says, do whatever you can in here, and instead of freaking out and produce an error, you would catch it. And then you don't actually have to write anything in the catch block, but you can. But try-catch only works on terminating errors. So if you try to catch a non-terminating error, it doesn't catch it. So you have to elevate it up to a terminating in order to catch it. So a lot of times you would use error action preference just to make sure that you have one type of errors to deal with instead of two of them.
If you use error action stop instead, do you get an error?
Do you mean SMA?
Yeah, SMA.
SMA will stop.
Yeah, but you won't get an error log in the history.
No, you would. The runbook would stop, and there's an exception property on the runbook, and that would be filled with whatever error, unless you wrap it in a try-catch.
You need basically to continue and make the error and then
So the point is that you would basically use a parent or like a wrapper runbook that has all the error handling logic. So if you say, and a real-life example is Hyper-V host deployment. You want to stop if the host can't be deployed, but you might want to continue if there's something wrong with patching it, and just report back, hey, I deployed the host, but I didn't fully patch it because blah, blah, blah. So you need to do that manually. So that's an example. More questions? You're just stretching. So yeah, and if you have questions about it, just talk to me later, and I'll probably be able to go into deeper stuff. So Jakob or Alexander also touched on inline scripts. Basically, if there's something we have trouble implementing in native workflow, we can do inline scripts. So inline scripts are also an important source of error, and of course we need to do error handling there as well. So I think I have something for that. Let's see. That's my inline script bug. There it is. The German would never have to look for scripts like that. He has everything under
just
control.
wait.
So what you can do if you want to make sure or want to look at or control the errors from an inline script, you can basically create an error collection, and then when you call an inline script, one of those built-in parameters is PS error. So instead of just stopping, you can pipe all the errors from that inline script up to that collection, and then I can later see, hey, if this is 0, I know that everything was all right, and if it's not 0, I know that something failed. And PS error will catch both terminating and non-terminating errors, so you don't have to separate between them when you do it like this. I don't know, I can try and run this. So that's nothing failed, but if I change it to a non-existent service and just run it again, then something failed. So the host didn't actually give me that red bad letters, but I know that something failed. And if I look into that error collection, I can actually see in detail what actually was the problem. Yes. So if my SMA server doesn't respond at this point, I guess the demo is over. No, it does. Questions, David? You good? You learning stuff?
Oh, all the time. Would you be able, in that error collection, would you be able to tell if it's an terminating or non-terminating error?
Yeah. So an error collection is a collection of errors, and on each error you have a property which says if it's a or if it's an exception or a non-terminating. I think that's how it works.
So that's good. Then you can then in that try catch, in that if loop, go and react onto each of those.
Yeah.
If it's greater than 0, react onto each of those
You should be able to do that.
errors.
We can test it because I should be able to stop it here, so I can actually peek inside my error collection maybe, and then I can do 0 get member. Yeah, there should be something in here which tells me whether it was terminating or not. I have no idea how to get out of debug mode on workflow. Oh well. So in like Jakob touched on, we can import modules into SMA, which is a great way of not having to install modules physically on the file system of each of our workers. We can just import it, and then SMA will make sure that that gets sent to the whatever worker server that's handling our job. Obviously, that only works inside of native workflow. If you switch to inline scripts, these modules are not accessible from inline scripts because you're kind of out of the domain of the workflow. So if you need to switch to inline script to do some advanced SCOM stuff, you still need to have the SCOM. SCOM is a terrible example because you need that anyway. But so if you need to access the modules from inside the inline script, you still need to install it the regular way on your server. So for instance, you can create a job that basically just grabs all the modules from SMA and actually install them onto each Runbook server. You can do that.
So those portable modules actually don't really make much sense.
Yeah, that's modules. Portable modules just gives you syntax inside the editor in SMA. So they provide actually no value at all. They just fill up the screen. And I have a demo for that, but I'll just say, no, I don't even want to spend time on it. Another thing with workflow, I don't know if Alex touched on that. Yeah?
When I work with inline script, I need some additional module. I can use activity parameter, PS required module, and that parameter will import a module into an inline script.
Yeah, if it's accessible by the file system. So these SMA modules won't help. You need to have it on the file system. Yeah. So one limitation of workflow, which you'll probably run into, is that you cannot do method invocations. And method invocations are, I really wish I wasn't in debug mode in my editor now. I'll just close that down and open it up again. Didn't work. Didn't work. So a method invocation is basically a hello, and then if I look at A with get member, you see there's a ton of methods, and those are stripped out when PowerShell converts all this stuff to SAML and for the workflow foundation. So you're not able to do, let's say you can't split, you can't convert it to whatever you want to convert it to.
And the reason for that is checkpointing, right?
Probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, for example, string compares, you can't do that. So what you can do instead is you can create a module which you call from inside of native workflow, and that will work. That will work. So that's a trick. If you really need to do method invocations inside of native workflow, you can put that functionality inside a module. But it might still be easier just to do inline scripts. Yeah. Is this like, is this helpful? Or is it just way, people are neither nodding or shaking their heads, so I'll just go on. There's a few common bugs in PowerShell workflow, and a lot of them are fixed in the version 5 preview, but most people are still on version 4, I guess, so I thought I'd just go through a couple of them.
Who's already on PowerShell 4? 1, 2, 3, 4. All the rest is PowerShell 3, right?
And you're starting up in Norway? So this one's a funny one. This cost me or the customer 2 days. And then, yeah, it took a while. So basically, this workflow takes a service name and a computer name as a parameter. Don't say anything, Alex. I don't want to hear it. And what it basically does, and then it goes into the SMA credential store and grabs the admin credentials of a user with enough access. And then it inline scripts into that computer with that credential and just grabs that service and does a get service on it. So easy enough, right? And then I have a wrapper that basically just calls this. So first I say get my server name spooler on the DC, and then I talk to the same computer and just try to grab another service. So here's the bug. I guess it was this one. So we'll just wait for that.
Yeah, and that's really not too uncommon, right?
No,
You've got one runbook and you just execute it twice.
True. So what should happen here is that I should get first the output of the get service spooler and then the get service whatever else I called. So here's what's happening. If you look at the inner thing here, I just write it. So the first write output comes from the native workflow, and then the second comes from the inline script. So the native workflow says, hey, I got service spooler on DC, and then it does a get service on that. And then here's the funny part. Um, the next time I call the same workflow, it says, hey, I got service bits on computer DC, but the inline script returns the same spooler. So it didn't realize that I actually changed from spooler to bits on that last run. And the reason is that a workflow, when workflow calls inline script, the session is not closed. It actually lingers for about 2 minutes. And if a workflow calls an inline script session that's already open, if you call it with some different parameters, they're not. So the inline script doesn't catch that basically. So this is obviously a huge bug, and it's fixed in V5, but we're not there. And the only good way I have figured out to get around it is basically just to sleep for 2 minutes. So I'll just sync that up. And yeah, and you might be able to do something on the run space config or the session config, but I think the customer already were fed up with me spending 2 days tracing this bug down, so I don't think they wanted to pay anymore. So I'll just this next guy will take a few minutes to run, so I'll just come back to that. And I have a few more. So yeah, so this is method invocations and how you can't do that. And actually the ISE will choke if you try and do one. Test A equals string A compared to, and it says, no sir, you're not allowed to do method invocations. So inline scripts or put it in a custom modules. Yeah, and then the other part is, I know there's some development here. I don't know, maybe in V5 they go away from this, but obviously we're used to doing get process where blah 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 name equals PowerShell or whatever. You can't do that in workflow. You have to use named parameters at all time. And I actually had to look this up, but when you say where blah blah blah, you're actually saying where object dash filter script. So this is the way to do it in PowerShell. So that might change for V5, but I don't know. Alex?
Even in function 4, that's a function where object appears.
Okay.
So in function 4, you can use positional parameters, but the bug is only in where object.
Right.
For example, if you have a for each, you don't need to say dash process.
Gotcha.
It will still work.
Gotcha. So yes, bugs all around.
We discovered that like 2 or 3 days ago with a SMA team.
Right. So I thought at the end of this demo section, I thought maybe I could just show you what a real workflow looks like. This is copied from a customer's production environment. So this runbook takes a computer name, an organizational unit, and optionally an owner account, and creates a disabled computer object. So it's ready for, it basically pre-stages a computer object, and we use this in OS deployment. So what I do, first I set verbose preference to continue so that I can pick up the verbose log in SMA if I need to. And then I set the error action preference to stop, so that if something fails anywhere in this workflow, it will report a terminating error back to the parent runbook. And then I check that they actually use an organizational unit that I like, so that if they try like domain.com, it will basically choke. So this write error, since I have error action preference set to stop, this will actually throw a terminating error. And then I guess I wouldn't have to do this, but yeah, like I said, it's a copy. And yeah, why I wanted to show this is to just show that you need to be super strict with you can't just write scripts like you write them on your computer. You need to do proper error handling and kind of figure out what is the sum of all the stupidity people might throw at this workflow, and kind of try and handle that in a good way. And then I usually always complete my workflows with just a write output that the name of the workflow actually completed, because when you get those thousands of lines of logs, it's nice to see where one runbook starts and the other begins. So I usually just sign off and say this was the end of that runbook. It just makes it easier to look at the logs. And I think that's the end of me for now.
The end of you. All right. Any questions for Trond? No.
I'm on Tinder as well. So.
All right. So we've seen error handling, some scripting best practices. Now, some performance optimization maybe for SMA. I found that picture on the internet. That's how you could motivate your employees, or you maybe better don't. Actually, that was hanging, or a similar picture was hanging in the room of one of my GPs back in Germany when he was measuring my blood pressure. Didn't really help. Side note. Anyways, so Microsoft says the recommended minimum number of SMA runbook workers is how many? No, 3. So you should have 3 or more, depending on your, as always, depending on your environment. Pictures. So how do you know, or how do you configure your runbook workers the best way possible? That's what I'm going to show you now. So you should be able to read this, because I checked myself, so everybody should be able to see this as well. On each and every runbook server, there's a orchestrator settings config file sitting in this path. So wherever you installed it in the root folder of your SMA installation. And there are some values which you can go and configure. It's actually supported. It's not just because Microsoft put it on a blog, but Microsoft actually says that's how you can go and configure the PowerShell run spaces on your SMA workers. So there's maximum running jobs and total allowed jobs and maximum running jobs per worker. To be honest, I have no idea why the maximum concurrent sandboxes is commented out. First I thought that was just me, but I've seen it in a customer's environment as well, so no idea why. But those are the default settings. So what if 1,000 total allowed jobs just doesn't fit for your environment? Or what if maximum running jobs per worker, which usually is not 1, quickly go to the original. This should be it. What's happening? No, that's showing 1 as well. Yeah, so the default value for maximum running jobs per worker is 120. So 120 jobs per worker concurrently. So I guess you are all aware of the concept of sandboxes. So whenever a job in SMA is spun up, a runbook worker is going to create a sandbox, which is just a PowerShell environment, and then execute the job in that environment. After a couple of jobs, which again is configurable in here, that sandbox is going to be recycled, thrown away, and a new one is spun up. So you can go and configure everything in here. So if you go and monitor your SMA workers, and you should, there's even a score management pack, I think, for SMA, and they report back, I've got no idea, too much CPU load. It's not really always the best solution to just throw 10 or 100 more workers at your environment if maybe all the rest is just idling around. There's still 80% of memory available on those workers. Just throwing more servers at it doesn't really help. So maybe, just maybe, there are too many jobs running concurrently that are very CPU intensive. So changing values in that config file could actually help. So if you go and reduce the number of maximum running jobs per worker, in this case to 1, and spin up like 400 jobs, they're going to run now. And then so that runbook actually does nothing except for sleeping for 10 seconds or something.
That's a big 40.
Mm. And then if I go to, by the way, ISE steroids, go buy it. So there you can see the sandbox on each server, on each runbook server. Right now, there's only one for each runbook worker. Should at one point go and recycle them. Might be that it just didn't change the setting yet. So just for that demo, I've written a small PowerShell module for SMA where I can go and set and get the SMA worker limit. I can go and set it to 1. That's strange.
You're on a different computer, I think. You're on a session.
That should work. Nothing for production. I'm not draining my jobs. I'm just restarting the service. So nothing for production. It's actually draining itself, but for your environment, it might just not be enough to just kill the service and restart it. So it's back now with a different ID, and then going to catch the other runbook jobs and execute them. So they are running. And next, usually when something goes wrong, so as long as everything's fine, I don't really care where my runbooks are running on. If I only have 1 or 2 or 3 runbook workers, troubleshooting could be a bit easy, or isn't really that hard. As soon as you get more than just 3 servers, you sometimes want to know on which runbook worker did that particular runbook job run on. So I found this, I think it's by Ryan Andorfer, SQL query, so it's not mine, where I can go and find the jobs and the runbook that run in a particular time frame on a given runbook worker, which is really helpful because if you go and look in Windows Azure Pack at your jobs, they don't tell you where they ran on. So if something's wrong with one of your workers, you might not really know just by looking at Windows Azure Pack. Something else that's interesting is how do jobs get assigned to your runbook workers? Because let's say in my environment I've got 2 runbook workers. You would expect that they kind of level out at 50-50. I did so as well, but it's not the case. So, oops, sorry. I've run 400 jobs, and it's still working, but as soon as they finished off, we will see that instead of 200 and 200 on each runbook worker, they kinda, it's not really 50-50, it's not 10-90, it's 40-60 maybe. So last time when I prepared that session, I've spun up 500, and on one machine I had 240 jobs, and on the other 260. So it's not really load balancing. The way those jobs get assigned is by, and we can already see a hint in here, by looking at the queues deployment table. No, that's not it. So those 2 columns, the low key and the high key, these are the partition IDs jobs get assigned to. So SMA 002 has a low key from 0 to a lot, and then SMA 001 from a lot to a lot more. So usually when a job gets assigned to a runbook worker, SMA randomly picks a number from 0 to that 21 billion, I think it is, a random number, and then assigns that number to that job. And that's how that job knows on which runbook worker to run on. So it's random, but not really random, but not really 50-50. So it's, yeah.
So what happens if O2 is down?
Nobody will know. So jobs will still be assigned to SMA 002. And if that server or a server with the same name comes back up, jobs get assigned to that server. So like I said, it's not really it's a bit like round robin. Stupid. It's not really load balancing. It just sends everything to that machine, even though it might be offline. Another very good and I think true picture nowadays. So I've shown you how to find out where your jobs ran on. Actually, that's something a customer once told me. I don't have to know everything, just have to know where it is. Usually it's Google. Dangerous, but true to an extent. Quickly want to touch on the SPF integration into SMA. It won't be a big topic right now, but so who's running SPF or who's used SPF before? A couple. So SPF is the API for VMM. So if you've got VMM and you do something in VMM, SPF will pick that up, and with SMA in Windows Azure Pack.
Oh, you had to do it through SPF in order for SPF to pick it up.
Yeah. Did I miss that?
Just want to clarify.
Okay. And then in Windows Azure Pack, you can link those SPF actions to an SMA runbook. Something that's easy to miss is, and I don't know why they've done it that way. I'm going to show you that now. Of course, that session's timed out. Usually a timeout means you haven't done something for a while. I've just used it, so why does it time out? So, Runbooks. In here, you can see a couple of runbooks that I'm using for automation, and the tag for those runbooks. Tags are just strings attached to runbook, a bit like a description. In this case, so we can use tags for a couple of things. For example, we can go and search runbooks by tags. Yeah, easy enough, makes sense. So I can also use the tag SPF. And if I want to use a runbook in my VM Cloud automation, just pick any, I have to tag that runbook with SPF. Otherwise, as you can see, I have 34 runbooks in my environment, but only 4 show up, because only 4 are tagged with SPF. If Microsoft is listening, I would like to have a checkbox somewhere, or a parameter in PowerShell to enable it for automation. Because why a string somewhere that everybody misses? When I started with Windows Azure Pack and VMM automation, it took me a couple of hours, and then I Googled and found it. So one thing that's important, that with SPF, so let's say you want to deploy a new VM through Windows Azure Pack, so you're logged on to the tenant portal, you're deploying a new VM, and you want to do stuff with automation, like you want to get that new VM's VM name. There are a couple of variables then you can use off of that job, off of that trigger. I'm not going to do a live demo now. because it takes a bit on my machine to run. But there's the variable p as private metadata, which you can use. And I've just, so that runbook is nothing more than just output of that private metadata variable. And, no, not that. Jobs. And then you can pick stuff off of that variable and use it later on in your runbooks, or pass it on to a different runbook and do stuff like rename a VM, because maybe it got a generic name and then you afterwards want to rename it, or it's called something in VMM but the OS is called something else. Heard of people doing that, calling them something in here, but the OS is called something completely different. Makes troubleshooting really easy. Okay. Questions? All right.
So I'll finish up, I guess. So during these, I don't know, 6 months of pretty intense SMA work, we discovered some stuff, and some stuff should be pretty obviously, and then some stuff took us a while to discover. So between my 2 projects, I think I'm responsible for around 20,000 lines of SMA code running in production right now. And one thing we noticed is that if you start using SMA for other things than just demo and disco balls, the experience the SMA teams wants you to do with editing inside the web GUI, it doesn't scale at all. So what you want to do is you want to organize your code on disk, and then you create yourself a little runbook, or just use mine, that will basically sync as you change or develop, sync those changes up to SMA. There's one, I wouldn't call it problem, but if you have a parent-child runbook in SMA and you edit the child, that parent will still run off the old version of the runbook, because that whole list of that whole hierarchy is compiled when you publish a runbook. So I developed this script that basically looks at each, compares each runbook on disk with the one inside of SMA, and then changes it. And if there's a change in a child, it will cascade up and republish the parent workbooks as well, so that you always are in sync. And this actually helped us. We were going to demo this huge Hyper-V deployment thing for a customer, and it didn't work. And there was a bunch of people in a meeting room. So using that functionality along with Git, the versioning control system, I could just step my entire 10,000 lines of code back 1 week, publish it up, and everything worked. So you need to work on disk, and you need to learn version control. You need to learn Git. It's not hard, but you need to do it. So that's my first. I didn't write it here, but yeah. The next one is perfect is the enemy of good. You can really dive down, and if you want to, you can spend ages on a workflow. Just make sure that error handling is solid, and you know whether or not you want a workflow to handle it itself or report error back up, and you're basically fine. You can always come back and do it better later. So don't try and create it perfect, just make it solid enough. Long-running workflows, couple of hours, you don't want to wait 90 minutes and then find an error. So it makes sense for you to do some testing early in your runbook, so that if you need to fail, you do that early. It just makes testing a lot easier. Reuse code, not by copying pasting, but use the same child runbook. So if you suspect that, hey, I'm going to be creating Active Directory user accounts or whatever often, then create a solid runbook for that and call into it. And then the last one, principle of least privilege. Don't run your runbook workers with a domain admin account. I know there's a lot of orchestrator environments out there that run as domain admin, but use the credential store in SMA and just pull the credentials you need. And that's the way it's meant to do. There's one, this is I think the last slide, so I think we're on time. You basically have SMA worker and then say that I want to create VMs. I need to talk to my VMM server. So there's a couple of ways I can do that. I can inline script into the VMM server or the VMM cluster, which has the VMM module, and then do my stuff there. That's one way to do it, and it's not wrong. Or I can choose to install that VMM PowerShell module on my SMA worker, and then the module will actually handle that remoting, right? It's built into the module that it should talk to VMM through whatever protocol it needs. And that's fine. There's one problem though. If you install the VMM or Active Directory or whatever module on your SMA server and then have to do inline scripting, you're basically faced with this double hop issue, which is a problem with Kerberos authentication. Because you have one hop from the native workflow to the inline script on the SMA server or the Runbook server, and then you have a second hop from that inline script out to Active Directory or VMM or whatever, which is not accepted. So you can do CRUD SSP to get around that. You can also go in Active Directory and trust for delegation is a setting on the computer object, which also allows you to actually go through with a double hop. So you just need to think about, especially with Active Directory, this is often an issue. So you just need to think about where you put your modules and how you organize kind of the flow of communication so that you don't get stuck with that double hop problem, which of course you handle in your code anyway. So I don't know, questions? Do you have any questions, David?
No, I'm good. And I think we're right on time.
Yeah. We're actually a minute early.
Yeah. So you've got 1 minute left to ask.
I'll fill 1 minute. I know there was a question for Jakob earlier on integration between SMA and other systems. And for one of our customers, this is a Hyper-V deployment thing. So after we've built all the SMA runbooks, they asked me, so how do we invoke that? I can't ask support to go into SMA, and I don't want to give them permission to that. And obviously, you can use Service Manager through like the Sarsen connector. For this particular customer, we actually created a custom ASP.NET web application. So whenever they want to spin up a new Hyper-V replica environment, they actually just type in some parameters into this pretty slick web GUI. This is an old build, by the way. It looks nicer now. Fill out the variables they need. We fixed that so it's not that many. And then they basically go step by step and invoke the tasks. So first is deploy hosts. Second is configure networking. Third is deploy VMs, whatever. So each of these buttons actually map to SMA runbook. And it's like 3 lines of code in C# to do that. So it's super easy. So that's one way to like build nice integrations on top of SMA if you want to do that. All right. Christian is eager to get started. So I guess we are done. Thanks, guys, for coming.
Thanks.